Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this second part of the lecture on surface enhanced Raman spectroscopy. Here we will focus our attention on chemical enhancement and charge transfer effects and provide some examples of materials for SERS. Charge transfer effects are at the origins of the chemical enhancement, as we will see. The e to the fourth model shown so far has some inconsistencies. The main one related to the fact that the SERS model of every molecule should be an enhanced version of its Raman ordinary spectrum, and this is not the case as experiments show, suggesting that there are additional and perhaps alternative effects underlying the SERS enhancement. Molecules interacting with surfaces can be either physisorbed or chemisorbed. In the physisorption process, van der Waals forces dominate. The interaction enthalpy is typically slower than minus 24 kJ per mole, and the structure of the molecule is only slightly modified. Conversely, in chemisorption, there is the formation of a chemical bond. The interaction enthalpy is stronger, smaller than minus 40 kJ per molecules, and electronic and geometrical structure of the molecule are deeply altered. The Raman cross-section and vibrational modes are expected to change. We define the so-called chemical enhancement factor as the ratio between the Raman cross-section of a molecule adsorbed on a surface and the molecule that is free. The factors that contribute to the chemical enhancement are basically two. There is a non-resonant chemical enhancement effect, in which the interaction does not lead to the formation of new electronic states between the molecule and the surface, and the interaction may induce an appreciable change in the geometrical and the electronic structure of the molecule that reveals as a mild modification of the Raman shifts and of the intensity of the vibrational modes. On the other hand, there are resonant charge transfer chemical effects, in which the interaction leads to the creation of new metal molecule charge transfer states, and if the Raman scattering is excited at resonance or pre-resonance with these new states, some Raman modes can be strongly enhanced, in particular those ones coupled to the allowed electronic transition. This is a schematic of what happens in this last effect, in which the molecule is connected, the electronic state of the molecules, the HOMO and the LUMO are combined with the electronic states of the metal, and some transition in order to occur can take either the resonant Raman route if the energy is sufficient, but if the energy is smaller, there can be some charge transfer states that can be resonant, and in this case provide resonant Raman amplification. The chemical enhancement, or photon-driven charge transfer enhancement, is considered as a resonance-like Raman enhancement associated with the excitation of molecule-metal system and the charge transfer between the molecule and the metal surface. This is shown in this picture. The process occurs in 4 steps. There is a first excitation of an electron in the metal induced by the incident photons, then the electron tunnels toward the molecule, is absorbed by the molecule, then there is the de-excitation of the electron back to the metal and the emission of a radiative scattered photon. Charge transfer occurs efficiently if the photon energy matches the energy gap between a metal and the molecular electronic state. There can be 2 cases. A first case in which we have a metal to molecule charge transfer. In this case, the incident photon excites an electron that is present in the metal and jumps to the LUMO energy level present in the metal, in the molecule. Vice versa, there can be a molecule to metal charge transfer in which the excitation photon couples to the HOMO state present in the molecule and jumps to a charge transfer state mixed between the molecule and the metal. Chemical enhancement effects are typically modeled using DFT, density functional theory. The properties of the molecule metal systems are studied by including ideally the full electronic structure of the moieties. This approach allows one to work out the Raman spectra of the absorbed species and reproduce precisely the shifts and the changes in intensity that take place upon absorption. DFT methods are used on both the resonant and non-resonant effects and can describe both effects. Studies are typically carried out on pyridine. This is the main Raman spectrum of pyridine, pure pyridine, and we see that when pyridine is bound to some clusters of metal, there can be silver, can be gold, or silver-gold combinations, we have something interesting in the sense that calculations show that the peaks can change in shape. This is the pristine Raman spectrum of pyridine. This is the SERS of pyridine on different structures. We see here that this mode in silver, 6 atoms, is strong while is almost totally quenched in gold-silver clusters. As well, this mode here is totally absent in the silver-gold cluster, but is strongly enhanced when the number of atoms changes. This is actually the typical fingerprint of the chemical enhancement, in which the same mode is amplified differently when the molecule is deposited on different materials. An analytical model taking into account both the chemical and the electromagnetic and the resonant Raman enhancement has been developed by John Lombardi and Bayek. In this case, the model is really oversimplified, but takes into account the important parameters and is able to describe some experimental results. In this model, the SERS cross-section takes into account all the three enhancements. The first is the plasmon resonant term, here at the denominator, that describes the possibility to resonantly excite plasmons in the metal nanostructure, in the metal substrate. Second is the resonance Raman term, in the case that the energy photon is sufficient to reach an unloaded state. And finally, the charge transfer resonance term, where omega Fk is the transition frequency between the Fermi state and one of the states of the molecule, in the case of the metal-to-molecule charge transfer. In the following slides, I will describe some of the materials and the methods that are used to produce SERS-active substrates. For what concerns the materials, playing with shape and with metals like silver or gold, it is possible to cover basically all the region that goes from the visible to the mid-infrared. Nowadays, there are several new materials, for example, dielectric and dielectric semiconductor hybrids, that has shown a strong SERS efficiency, in spite of the fact that, being not metals, the absorption in these materials can be negligible, and so heating effects can be negligible. Other materials, like hybrid plasmonic materials made of iron, copper, nickel, ruthenium, have been developed. Silver and aluminum is the elective materials for carrying out SERS in the ultraviolet. SERS substrate can be made by top-down or bottom-up approaches. In this case, here I show some lithographied nanoantennas made of gold, silver, can be made of copper also. The typical approach, the typical method is the electron beam lithography, in which an electron beam is used to write into a photoresist, and then after etching techniques and subsequent optical electronic writing procedures, it is possible to grow metallic nanostructures on flat surfaces. Nanoantennas are typically produced into arrays in order to maximize the signal and the reproducibility of the sample. An efficient technique to produce large area plasmonic substrate is direct ion beam sputtering. In this case, a flat gold film is bombarded with argon ions in order to locally destabilize the surface and produce individual structures. This is an AFM picture of a gold nanowires sample, and here is shown the plasmonic resonance when the field is orthogonal to the nanocavities. Individual nanostructures can also be made by direct deposition at glancing angle. In this case, some self-assembled monolayer or polymeric nanospheres has been produced, and after this some gold has been deposited at glancing angle in order to form these sort of nanocrescent shapes that, as shown here, feature nice plasmonic resonances. This method is large area and very low cost. Finally, chemical synthesis is a very efficient procedure to make very small nanoparticles whose size go from few nanometers to some hundreds of nanometers. It is a large-scale production method. The only inconvenience is that there is an environment, and the environment is not necessarily clean. Here we show that playing with surfactants, geometry, and growth conditions, we can fabricate materials in different shapes: spheres, cubes, triangles, pyramids, nanorods, nanowires, as on demand. Materials are nowadays commercial, and we can purchase nanorods or nanospheres with the desired plasmonic resonance. I suggest this first paper for a recent review on plasmonic and SERS materials, and these two other papers for chemical enhancement in SERS.